A cold January morning in Los Angeles should have felt ordinary, but something about the quiet air didn't sit right with the people who lived near Norton Avenue. The sky was pale, the streets were still, and the city was waking up slowly, completely unaware that within minutes, a discovery would freeze the entire neighborhood. As the sun rose over the houses, a young mother pushed a stroller down the sidewalk, thinking only about breakfast and her daily routine. But then she stopped. Something ahead caught her attention. At first glance, it looked like a discarded mannequin lying in an empty lot, the kind of strange sight you simply avoid and move past. Yet something about it made her take another step. And another. And when she did, her world shifted. The figure wasn't plastic. It wasn't a mannequin. It was real. And within that moment, Los Angeles lost its sense of normalcy. Police arrived almost immediately, and what they saw left even seasoned investigators struggling to understand what they were witnessing. It wasn't just a life cut short, it was a message. A staged display. Something so precise, so deliberate, that the detectives knew right away this wasn't the work of chance or a passing moment of anger. This was something planned. Something executed with intention. And the person responsible wanted the scene to be found exactly like this. The victim was soon identified as a young woman with dark hair, bright eyes, and dreams bigger than the city she lived in, Elizabeth Short. A name that would later echo across decades under a title she never asked for. A title the world still remembers. But the question that shook the entire city remains unsolved even now. Who turned the life of a hopeful young woman into the most puzzling mystery Hollywood has ever seen? From the moment investigators stepped onto that quiet lot, they realized they weren't dealing with a simple case. They were dealing with something carefully constructed. A mystery that demanded answers but refused to reveal them. A puzzle with missing pieces scattered across the city, pieces hidden in nightclubs, hotels, friendships, secrets, and a web of people who all claimed to know Elizabeth but didn't truly understand her world. And that world is where everything begins. Because before we can uncover the suspects, the theories, the mistakes, and the hidden truths that still haunt this case, we have to understand who Elizabeth Short really was. Behind the headlines, behind the fear, and behind the legend that was created around her name, there was a person with real struggles, real hopes, and a journey that led her straight into the heart of Los Angeles, a place filled with dreams but also shadows. And somewhere in those shadows, the first clue to this mystery is waiting. Before newspapers turned her into a headline, before the city whispered about her case, and long before her name became tied to one of the most confusing mysteries in American history, Elizabeth Short was simply a young woman trying to find her place in the world. And to understand how her journey led her to Los Angeles, and eventually to that empty lot, we need to step far away from the crime scene and into the life she lived long before anyone knew her name. Elizabeth grew up far from the bright lights of Hollywood. She was born in Medford, Massachusetts, a quiet town where life moved at a much slower pace. Her childhood was filled with the same challenges many families faced during the difficult years of the early 1900s. Her father suddenly disappeared when she was young, leaving the family in confusion and financial struggle. For years, Elizabeth believed he had passed away, and that loss shaped her more deeply than anyone realized at the time. But later, she would discover he was alive the entire time, a revelation that carried its own weight and confusion. As a teenager, Elizabeth became known for something that would follow her for the rest of her life: her presence. There was something unforgettable about her. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she dreamed. She wasn't someone who blended into the background. People remembered her. And that ability to stand out, the same thing that gave her confidence, would eventually place her in circles and situations filled with both opportunity and danger. Elizabeth also faced health challenges that caused her to spend long periods away from school and work. Those moments made her more determined to chase a future where she felt strong, free, and in control of her own life. Slowly, the idea of leaving her small town grew into a dream she couldn't ignore, a dream driven by the belief that she was meant for something more than the life she knew. So she followed that dream. She traveled, she moved from place to place, and she began forming connections with people who promised opportunity. And that path eventually led her to Los Angeles, the city where dreams could shift into reality, but also the city where illusions and danger lived side by side. In Los Angeles, Elizabeth wasn't the glamorous figure that later stories tried to create. She lived through constant ups and downs. She stayed at hotels, with friends, and sometimes with people she barely knew. She worked where she could. She dressed with style even when money was tight. She carried herself with confidence even when life around her was unstable. She wanted to be noticed, not for the attention, but because she believed attention could open doors. And doors did open, but not always the ones she expected. She crossed paths with men who admired her, men who misunderstood her, and men who made promises they never intended to keep. She navigated relationships that were complicated, friendships that were unpredictable, and situations where she struggled to maintain control. Elizabeth was not reckless, she was hopeful. She wanted to build a better life. She wanted something meaningful. But she was also moving through a city where charm and danger often wore the same face. Through it all, she remained someone who believed tomorrow would bring something better. That belief pushed her from place to place and conversation to conversation. And it was that belief, that desire for a breakthrough, that ultimately guided her steps in the days leading up to her disappearance. Because in her final days, Elizabeth wasn't lost. She wasn't wandering without direction. She was meeting people, arranging plans, and staying hopeful. She had goals for herself that she didn't share with many. And those goals brought her into contact with individuals who would become the last people to ever see her alive. Her story was not one of fame. It was one of perseverance, a young woman fighting for a place in a world that wasn't always fair to her. And as investigators would later discover, understanding her life was the key to understanding the complex path that led to her final hours. And now that we know who she was, not the headline, not the legend, but the person, we can step into the part of the story where her path becomes unclear. A moment when the dream she chased collided with a night filled with unanswered questions. Hold on, before we continue, I need to tell you something important. Every single day, someone becomes a victim simply because they didn't know what signs to look for or what danger feels like before it strikes. And that's exactly why I created the ebooks in my store. These books will literally show you how to stay safe, how to avoid becoming a target, and how to understand the mindset of dangerous people before they strike. I'm not exaggerating. This is knowledge that can save your life or someone you care about. If you're watching this right now, that means you're already interested in crime stories, but real-life crime doesn't give second chances. Take 5 seconds and click the link in my channel bio, check out the store, and grab something that could protect you or your family. Don't wait until it's too late and wish you had learned these things earlier. The link is right there, go check it out now, and let's get back to the story. If you're enjoying the video, don't just watch and scroll, hit subscribe now. Every time someone skips subscribing, stories like these risk being forgotten. And while you're at it, comment where you're watching from. It only takes a second, but it shows you care about keeping these stories alive. Don't be the viewer who just watches, be the one who helps these stories matter. Subscribe. Comment. Make your presence count. As Elizabeth moved through her final days, nothing about her behavior suggested she was walking toward danger. In fact, she seemed focused, determined, and hopeful, traits that made her stand out to the people who saw her during that time. But looking back, those final movements feel almost like scattered pieces of a puzzle, each one hinting at something deeper beneath the surface. In the week before her disappearance, Elizabeth was staying with friends and acquaintances, trying to stabilize her plans. She often relied on temporary arrangements, shifting from home to home depending on who had space or who offered help. This wasn't unusual for her, she was used to adjusting to whatever life threw at her. And yet, something about these last movements feels different, almost as if her path was quietly tightening around her. Witnesses described her mood as calm but focused, like someone preparing for a new beginning. She spent time meeting people, making phone calls, arranging possible job opportunities, and discussing her hopes for the next few months. Her world was unstable, but her mindset was not. She believed better days were coming. As she moved around Los Angeles, Elizabeth crossed paths with men she knew, acquaintances she trusted, and people who showed interest in helping her. Some offered rides. Some offered meals. Some offered attention she didn't always request. Each interaction seemed harmless in the moment, but investigators would later discover that nearly everyone she spoke to during those days would become part of a long list of people questioned by police. One of the last confirmed places she was seen was the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She arrived there looking composed, dressed in her usual clean and stylish way, despite living a life that offered very little comfort. She sat in the lobby, speaking softly to the staff, waiting for someone who never arrived. For a while, she simply blended into the background of people coming and going, a young woman with dark hair and a distant expression, lost in her thoughts. Eventually, she stood up, thanked the people she had spoken to, and walked out through the lobby doors into the evening air. That walk, that simple, silent walk, is the moment everything becomes uncertain. From that point forward, her movements lose clarity. Some said they saw her near public transportation. Others said she was walking through different parts of the city. A few claimed she entered a vehicle. None of these accounts could be fully confirmed. Every sighting added hope, then confusion. Every detail seemed to lead somewhere, but never far enough. What investigators would later realize is that in those lost hours, those hours after she left the Biltmore, Elizabeth unknowingly stepped into the final chapter of her life. She might have been looking for a place to stay, meeting someone she trusted, or simply trying to get through the night safely. The truth remains hidden in shadows. No one can say for certain who she met, who she spoke with, or who watched her walk alone. But what we do know is this. Someone crossed paths with her during those hours. Someone offered something she accepted, a ride, a conversation, or a promise. And someone used that moment to change her story forever. Her disappearance was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, almost invisible to the people moving through the city around her. While Los Angeles carried on with its bright lights and crowded streets, Elizabeth walked into a meeting that would never be recorded, never witnessed, and never fully understood. And as the city slept, her name slipped into the shadows. The next time she would be seen, the sun would be rising over Norton Avenue, and the entire city would be thrown into one of the most puzzling mysteries it had ever faced. But before detectives could connect the discovery to Elizabeth, they first had to confront the scene itself, a scene so unexpected that even the most experienced officers struggled to make sense of it. The morning of January 15 began quietly, the kind of calm that settles over a neighborhood before anyone has fully started their day. Norton Avenue looked ordinary, rows of small homes, empty yards, and a thin layer of sunrise brushing across the city. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing hinted that this peaceful neighborhood was about to become the center of national attention. A young mother walked her usual route, pushing a stroller across the sidewalk. She wasn't looking for anything unusual. She wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. She was simply living another normal morning. But as she approached the empty lot, she slowed down. Something ahead caught her eye. At first glance, it appeared to be a mannequin lying in the grass, placed as if someone had thrown it away. It looked too pale, too still, too carefully positioned. She took a few hesitant steps forward, each one pulling her closer to the truth she didn't want to uncover. And with every step, her confusion shifted into fear. Because the closer she got, the more she realized that this was not a mannequin. It was not plastic. It was not a discarded store prop. It was a person. A real body. She froze, gripping the stroller, unable to move or speak. The stillness of the morning suddenly felt heavy. The neighborhood, moments earlier so calm, now felt as if it was holding its breath. Within minutes, police officers arrived. What they saw did not match anything they expected. It wasn't the kind of case that began with uncertainty. It was a scene that demanded attention the moment they stepped onto the lot. Officers approached slowly, trying to process what they were looking at. The body had been placed with exact precision, as if the person responsible wanted the discovery to look staged. The position was deliberate, controlled, almost unnerving in its stillness. The detectives tried to understand what they were seeing, but the more they looked, the more they realized one thing: this was not the result of a struggle in the moment. It wasn't random. It wasn't rushed. Whoever had done this had taken time. Time to move, time to arrange, and time to ensure the scene looked exactly as it appeared. Even the ground around the body told a story. There were no signs of a struggle. No drag marks. No footprints indicating chaos. It looked as though the body had been placed there carefully, almost gently. That alone puzzled investigators. How could someone do something so calculated without being seen? How had a neighborhood with homes on every side witnessed nothing that night? As more officers and detectives arrived, they began scanning the surrounding area. The lot was open, fully visible from the street. Anyone driving past that morning could have seen the figure lying there. And yet, the person responsible walked away undetected. It was as if they knew the exact window of time when the street would be empty. As if they knew no one would be watching. Reporters arrived not long after. In those days, the press moved quickly, and the moment the story reached them, they swarmed the scene. Their presence added pressure, noise, and confusion. Cameras clicked. Questions flew. The neighborhood filled with voices and speculation. And with every new arrival, the detective's job became harder. Evidence was at risk of being lost, contaminated, or overlooked. But despite the chaos, one detail stood out to investigators more than anything else. The person who had created this scene knew what they were doing. The placement, the precision, the confidence, it all pointed to someone with experience. Someone who wasn't afraid. Someone who wanted this scene to be found exactly as it was. As officers worked through the morning, they searched for identification, clues, or anything linking the victim to a name. There were no belongings nearby. No purse. No wallet. No items that offered immediate answers. For hours, the identity remained unknown. But when the name finally came, when detectives matched this figure in the empty lot to a young woman last seen walking out of the Biltmore Hotel, the entire investigation changed direction. The life of Elizabeth Short collided with the crime scene that now carried her name. Detectives realized instantly that this was not a case they could solve quickly. Everything about the scene suggested intention, knowledge, and planning from someone who wanted to leave a message without leaving themselves behind. Someone who wanted to show their work without revealing their identity. And as officers stepped back from the scene, taking in the full picture, they understood something chilling about the investigation ahead. The person responsible was not hiding. They were performing. And if this scene was a statement, then the clues hiding in the days before her disappearance were the only way to understand who had taken her life and why. From the very moment Elizabeth Short's body was discovered on that cold January morning, Los Angeles transformed. The city, known for its glitz, glamour, and Hollywood dreams, suddenly felt smaller, darker, and filled with questions that had no immediate answers. What had happened to her? Who could do something so precise, so calculated? And why? The Los Angeles Police Department was under immediate pressure. Reporters flooded the streets, eager to report the shocking details. Headlines screamed, photographs circulated, and neighbors whispered about what they had seen, or what they hadn't seen. But the truth was far more complicated than anyone realized. Each lead brought new suspects, and each suspect seemed to raise more questions than answers. From the beginning, the investigation would be tangled in a web of conflicting reports, false confessions, and public pressure that blurred the line between facts and speculation. Detectives quickly learned they were fighting not only a mystery, but also the media. Journalists were desperate for stories, and some crossed lines, publishing details that jeopardized the investigation. Names of supposed suspects appeared in newspapers before detectives had time to verify them. Letters arrived at the police station, some claiming to be from the killer, others offering information that was clearly false. Each false lead pulled resources and focus away from what mattered, finding the person who had taken Elizabeth's life. From the very first hours, the case became a maze. Witnesses reported seeing her in various places in the days before her disappearance. Some recalled her walking alone. Others claimed she had been in cars with strangers. One person said they had seen her near a bus stop. Another insisted she had visited a friend's apartment late at night. The pieces did not align. And every conflicting story created more confusion. The list of suspects quickly grew. Every man Elizabeth had interacted with in her final weeks became a person of interest. Anyone who had offered her a ride, a place to stay, or even a conversation was questioned. Investigators pored over her relationships, her friends, her acquaintances. Yet no one had a clear timeline of her movements. No one could provide a consistent story that explained what had happened to her. And as days turned into weeks, the pressure to solve the case only increased. The police also faced challenges that made solving the case nearly impossible. Key evidence was mishandled. Witnesses changed their accounts. Neighborhoods were overcrowded with reporters, making it easy for crucial details to be overlooked. And because Elizabeth's murder was so unusual, so calculated, investigators struggled to categorize it. It was not a crime of passion. It was not a random act. It had elements that suggested planning, experience, and control. Yet there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no immediate leads pointing to the person who had orchestrated it. Amid this confusion, one fact became clear: Los Angeles itself had become a character in this story. The bright lights, the bustling streets, and the crowded nightclubs created endless opportunities for danger to hide. The city's very glamour now worked against the investigation, masking secrets, providing escape routes, and making it almost impossible to track a single person's movements with certainty. Despite these obstacles, detectives pressed on. They interviewed hundreds of people. They examined Elizabeth's life in painstaking detail. They tried to map her final days, reconstructing her steps, her meetings, and her connections. But every answer seemed to generate more questions. Letters claiming to be from the killer kept arriving. People confessed to crimes they did not commit. And with each passing day, the case grew more complex, more confusing, and more haunting. What detectives quickly realized was that solving this case would not be simple. The truth was buried beneath layers of lies, confusion, and carefully constructed deception. The person who had taken Elizabeth had orchestrated their actions with precision, and now the city itself seemed to resist discovery, as if the streets, the hotels, and the night itself were hiding secrets that would not easily be revealed. And as investigators struggled, the first serious suspects began to emerge. Men who had crossed paths with Elizabeth in her final days became the focus. Each one had motives, alibis, and secrets. Each one had shadows that could hide the truth. But determining which shadow held the real culprit was far from easy. The investigation was no longer just about a murder. It had become a maze of human behavior, a puzzle of psychology, and a test of patience. Every corner revealed more questions than answers. Every discovery raised more suspicion. And every lead seemed designed to keep detectives chasing shadows. As the investigation unfolded, it quickly became clear that solving Elizabeth Short's murder would require examining the men who had crossed her path during her final days. Each of these individuals carried a shadow of suspicion, a thread that could connect them to the crime, or distract investigators entirely. Hollywood, with all its bright lights and secret corridors, was filled with people who seemed friendly, helpful, or charming. But beneath that surface, some harbored secrets the public could never see. The first name that haunted investigators was Dr. George Hodel, a man whose life seemed ordinary on the surface but became far more sinister as evidence slowly emerged over decades. Hodel was a physician with an interest in surgery and anatomy, a fact that investigators later realized aligned disturbingly with the precision of Elizabeth's body. Years later, Hodel's son would claim that his father had admitted involvement in violent acts, raising questions about whether Elizabeth had encountered someone with knowledge of the human body that went far beyond ordinary understanding. Even in 1947, detectives noted Hodel's strange behavior and his connections to Hollywood's shadowy circles, but at the time, there was little they could do to confirm suspicions. Next was Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner with ties to Los Angeles's entertainment world. He knew Elizabeth and had offered her opportunities, some of which seemed promising, others questionable. Hansen had access to spaces that few others did, rooms, parties, and back entrances where visibility was low and secrecy was easily maintained. Investigators questioned him thoroughly. He provided alibis, explanations, and stories, yet inconsistencies lingered. Those small gaps, though not immediately conclusive, fueled speculation for decades afterward. Another figure that drew attention was Leslie Dillon, a bellhop who later became infamous due to his confessions to authorities. Dillon's knowledge of the case, combined with his behavior, raised alarm among detectives. He was articulate, observant, and in some accounts, eerily calm when describing what he claimed to know. While his confessions were controversial and often contradicted by facts, they added a layer of intrigue that made him impossible to ignore. Investigators at the time struggled to determine whether he was a truthful witness, a manipulator, or a suspect in his own right. Beyond these central figures, countless other men became part of the investigation. Friends, acquaintances, strangers who offered rides, and those with fleeting interactions with Elizabeth were all scrutinized. Each had potential motives, opportunities, or unexplained behavior. And yet, despite the sheer number of people involved, the truth remained elusive. Every suspect added more complexity to the case rather than clarity, turning the investigation into a labyrinth of questions, half-truths, and dead ends. What set this case apart was not just the brutality or the precision of the crime, but the careful selection of individuals who could have been involved. It wasn't just a random act. Someone had planned, observed, and acted with knowledge of both the victim and the city around her. Each suspect represented a possibility, a theory, and a potential answer that might finally explain the mystery. But every time investigators thought they were closing in, contradictions and uncertainty pulled them back, leaving the case as open and confusing as ever. The investigation into these men revealed patterns, behaviors, and connections that suggested the killer might have been someone familiar with Elizabeth's world, someone who understood her routines, her desires, and her trust. It was a chilling thought, one that suggested that even in a bustling city filled with strangers, Elizabeth had been followed, observed, and targeted by someone who knew exactly how to approach her. Even now, decades later, the debate continues. Was the killer one of these men, someone else entirely, or someone who disappeared from history without a trace? Each suspect has left a legacy of questions, theories, and speculation, and each has contributed to the enduring fascination of the Black Dahlia case. The puzzle of suspects leads naturally to the most compelling theories: what actually happened during those last hours, and how could a person move through the city, commit such a precise crime, and vanish without leaving a clear trail? The story of the suspects sets the stage for the haunting questions that still linger, the theories that still divide experts, and the mystery that remains unsolved. Even after decades of investigation, Elizabeth Short's murder continues to fascinate because the truth is shrouded in layers of uncertainty, contradictions, and unanswered questions. The crime scene itself offered a chilling message: precision, intention, and control. But beyond the scene, the why and how remain deeply mysterious. Over the years, experts, journalists, and amateur investigators have proposed countless theories, each trying to explain the impossible puzzle of that night. One of the most widely discussed ideas is that Elizabeth fell victim to a professional killer, someone with knowledge of anatomy or experience in handling bodies. This theory points to the surgical precision evident in the way her body was arranged. To detectives, the methodical nature of the crime suggested more than impulsive violence. It hinted at experience, planning, and perhaps a dark fascination with control. But if the killer was truly professional, how did they manage to act without leaving witnesses or evidence? This question alone keeps the theory alive, because it fits the facts yet stretches imagination. Another theory revolves around personal relationships. Some suggest Elizabeth knew her attacker, someone who lured her under the guise of trust or opportunity. Friends, acquaintances, and men she had crossed paths with all fall under scrutiny here. The theory argues that her attacker could have had a motive rooted in jealousy, anger, or obsession, emotions powerful enough to drive someone to act in secrecy and violence. This explanation is haunting because it implies betrayal from someone Elizabeth might have trusted, making the mystery both personal and terrifying. A third theory proposes that the murder was connected to Hollywood's hidden world of corruption and exploitation. Elizabeth had ambitions in the film industry, which meant she interacted with people who had influence, money, and secrets. Some investigators suggest that she might have been targeted by someone wanting to control, manipulate, or even silence her. The city's bright lights and glamorous image, in this theory, became a mask for danger. Hollywood offered opportunity, but it also provided cover, allowing someone to act in plain sight without detection. Another possibility that has persisted in discussions is the cover-up theory. From the moment the police arrived at the crime scene, the investigation faced mistakes, lost evidence, and interference from the press. Some believe this was not coincidental, that someone powerful influenced the investigation to prevent the truth from surfacing. If true, it would mean that even if the killer was known to authorities, the full story may have been buried deliberately, leaving only fragments of clues and endless speculation. Every theory carries some evidence, but none carry the full answer. Witness statements contradict each other, letters claiming to be from the killer proved false, and suspects offered explanations that were impossible to verify. Some theories overlap, others contradict. But the common thread remains: Elizabeth Short's final hours involved someone who understood her movements, observed her routines, and acted with intent. Whoever it was, they moved through the city without being caught, leaving behind a scene that continues to puzzle investigators. And yet, the lack of resolution does not diminish the fascination. It amplifies it. People are drawn to the mystery because it defies easy explanation. Every piece of evidence, every confession, and every lead seems to point somewhere, but ultimately leads back to questions. Questions about human behavior, opportunity, and the darkness that can hide behind charm or familiarity. The theories surrounding Elizabeth Short's death remind us of a larger truth: some crimes are not solved because the person committing them planned it that way. They calculated every step, manipulated the environment, and disappeared into shadows, leaving only the aftermath for the world to witness. As we examine these possibilities, it's important to remember that the theories are more than speculation, they are attempts to make sense of a reality that remains elusive. And the struggle to find truth brings us to the next critical point: why the case was never solved, despite decades of effort, resources, and intense scrutiny. The Black Dahlia case remains one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in American history, not simply because the murder was shocking, but because the investigation was plagued by missteps, confusion, and errors that ensured the truth would remain elusive. From the very first moments after Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, the detectives faced challenges that would shadow the case for decades. One of the first problems was the overwhelming media attention. Newspapers across Los Angeles and beyond descended on the story immediately, competing for the most sensational headlines. Reporters published details about the crime before investigators could verify them, spreading misinformation, speculation, and rumors. Names of potential suspects appeared in print without confirmation. Letters claiming to be from the killer were widely publicized, even though many were later proven to be hoaxes. The media frenzy created a situation in which truth and fiction became nearly indistinguishable, making the job of detectives exponentially harder. Another major factor was lost and mishandled evidence. In the chaos following the discovery of Elizabeth's body, critical details were overlooked. Officers failed to properly document parts of the crime scene. Important items that might have offered clues disappeared or were contaminated. Footprints, fibers, and other physical evidence were compromised by curious onlookers and journalists who crowded the area. In a case that required precision and careful collection of every detail, these mistakes meant that certain leads were lost forever. Witness statements added layers of confusion. Elizabeth had interacted with many people in her final days, and while some came forward to help, others gave inconsistent or conflicting accounts. Some claimed to have seen her at certain locations at specific times, while others disputed those sightings entirely. With so many voices, detectives struggled to create a reliable timeline, and the lack of clarity allowed suspects to remain under the radar. Complicating matters further was the sheer number of false confessions. Almost immediately after the murder, individuals came forward claiming responsibility. Some were mentally unstable. Others were seeking attention. Each confession diverted resources, delayed progress, and created doubt in the minds of investigators. Every false lead was a wasted opportunity, and the real killer remained free, watching as the chaos unfolded. The Black Dahlia case also suffered from interdepartmental and procedural issues within law enforcement. Multiple agencies were involved, but communication was poor. Different officers had different theories, priorities, and methods, resulting in a fragmented approach to the investigation. Key decisions were sometimes made hastily, or based on incomplete information, further burying the truth. Perhaps most critically, the case highlighted the danger of assumptions. Investigators initially focused on certain suspects while ignoring others. Some leads were prematurely discarded. Some evidence that could have pointed to the real killer was not given proper attention. Every assumption had consequences, and in a case so calculated, even small errors allowed the true perpetrator to remain hidden. Even decades later, experts analyzing the case note that the environment itself contributed to the failure. Hollywood, with its endless parties, hotels, and shadowed streets, made it easy for someone to move undetected. The city's glamour masked danger. Its crowds provided cover. And its endless network of acquaintances, strangers, and opportunists created a perfect maze for the crime to disappear within. All these factors combined to make the Black Dahlia murder more than a tragedy. They made it a mystery that the city, the media, and the police could not untangle. The mistakes, oversights, and uncontrollable chaos surrounding the case ensured that answers would be obscured, leaving Elizabeth's short story trapped between reality and legend. Despite decades of research, forensic analysis, and persistent investigation by both authorities and amateur detectives, the case remains unsolved. The mistakes that buried the truth did not erase her story. Instead, they amplified its mystery, creating one of the most enduring unsolved crimes in history. Even decades after Elizabeth Short's murder, the Black Dahlia case continues to captivate the world, not only because of its brutality, but because it has resisted every attempt at resolution. While the original investigation was hampered by mistakes, miscommunication, and lost evidence, modern technology and renewed interest in the case have breathed new life into old clues, offering fresh ways to examine a mystery that has long been shrouded in darkness. Advances in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, have changed the way cold cases are investigated. In Elizabeth's case, forensic experts have revisited photographs, letters, and physical evidence in the hopes of uncovering traces of the killer that were invisible to investigators in 1947. Though the physical evidence from the crime scene was limited and, in many cases, compromised, modern techniques allow experts to examine what remains with far greater precision, searching for connections that were impossible to detect at the time. In addition to scientific advancements, renewed research into Elizabeth's life and relationships has uncovered details that were overlooked or forgotten. Friends, acquaintances, and family members have shared memories and insights that provide context to her final days, helping researchers create more accurate timelines and explore interactions that may have been missed in the original investigation. Every scrap of information, no matter how small, becomes a potential clue when paired with modern analysis. True crime historians and amateur detectives have also contributed to the ongoing investigation, combing through archives, newspapers, police reports, and even photographs to identify patterns, suspects, and inconsistencies that may have been invisible to law enforcement in the 1940s. Some of these researchers have proposed new suspects or revisited old ones with fresh eyes, often uncovering connections that were previously ignored or dismissed. Each discovery adds another layer to the complex story of Elizabeth Short's final days. One of the most fascinating aspects of the modern perspective is the ability to digitally reconstruct the crime scene. Using photographs, maps, and contemporary imaging technology, investigators can now simulate the environment in which Elizabeth's murder took place, analyze sightlines, and study how the perpetrator could have approached, executed, and left the scene undetected. These reconstructions allow for theories to be tested in ways that were unimaginable in the 1940s. Social media and public interest have also played a surprising role in the case's modern exploration. Crowdsourced investigations, forums, and documentaries have enabled people from around the world to contribute ideas, analyze details, and raise questions that sometimes challenge established theories. While not all contributions are credible, the collective attention ensures that the case remains alive, and that new evidence, when discovered, is quickly amplified. Despite these modern tools, the core mystery remains. Elizabeth's life was stolen in a calculated act, and her killer, whether known or unknown, remains hidden in the shadows of history. Even with new technology and renewed attention, the gaps in evidence, the passage of time, and the deliberate actions of the perpetrator continue to obstruct the truth. Yet, hope persists. Every new forensic method, every newly discovered letter, photograph, or witness account offers a chance, however small, to finally solve a case that has haunted generations. The Black Dahlia murder has become more than a story of tragedy. It is a testament to the persistence of human curiosity, the desire for justice, and the relentless search for answers in the face of nearly impossible odds. The modern perspective reminds us that while the past may be fixed, our understanding of it is constantly evolving. Every clue, old or new, is a piece of the puzzle that could someday reveal the full truth about Elizabeth Short, the bright young woman whose life ended too soon, and the city that was never the same after that cold morning in 1947. Elizabeth Short's story does not end with her death, because her life, her mystery, and the questions surrounding her final hours continue to echo across generations. The Black Dahlia case is not just a headline. It is a reflection of a city, a culture, and a fascination with both dreams and darkness. While decades of investigation, theories, and speculation have attempted to define her story, Elizabeth herself remains elusive. More than a victim, she is a symbol of the fragile boundary between hope and danger. When we look back at her life, it becomes clear that Elizabeth was more than the sensationalized image the press created. She was a young woman with aspirations, desires, and courage. She moved through a world that was often unforgiving, striving to carve out her own place. Her journey from Massachusetts to Los Angeles was not aimless, it was driven by ambition, by a dream that so many shared in that city of endless possibilities. But in chasing that dream, she encountered a darkness that would forever change the way the world remembers her. Her legacy is intertwined with the failures of the investigation, the mistakes of law enforcement, and the fascination of the media. Each misstep, each lost clue, and each false lead has contributed to the myth that surrounds her story. The Black Dahlia has become a name that evokes curiosity, fear, and intrigue, but behind that legend lies a young woman whose life was abruptly taken. Understanding her story reminds us that real people lie behind the headlines, and that the consequences of crime are deeply human. Elizabeth's case also left an indelible mark on Los Angeles. It exposed the vulnerabilities of a city that was glamorous on the surface but filled with secrets, shadows, and people who could move undetected through its streets. The murder influenced law enforcement practices, media coverage, and public perception of crime in urban spaces. It revealed the dangers of mixing sensationalism with investigation and showed how easily truth could be obscured when ambition, secrecy, and fear intersect. Even now, the Black Dahlia case continues to challenge our understanding of human behavior. Each new theory, each re-examination of evidence, and each attempt at solving the puzzle serves as a reminder that not every crime can be neatly explained. The unknown elements of Elizabeth's death, her final hours, the identity of the killer, and the motives behind the crime, leave us questioning, theorizing, and reflecting. This is part of why her story endures. It is unresolved, yet profoundly compelling. Ultimately, the legacy of Elizabeth Short is more than the horror of her death. It is a story about the fragility of life, the complexity of human relationships, and the shadows that exist in every society. It reminds us to look beyond the sensational headlines and consider the people behind them, their struggles, their dreams, and the circumstances that shape their lives. Her story encourages reflection on how we view crime, justice, and the way society remembers victims. And though decades have passed, one question still lingers: who took Elizabeth Short's life, and why? While answers remain hidden in history, the story of the Black Dahlia continues to captivate, intrigue, and haunt those who dare to explore it. Her life, her death, and the mysteries that surround them are forever intertwined, creating a legacy written not in clarity, but in secrets, questions, and the enduring search for truth. Elizabeth Short may have died too young, but her story lives on. It reminds us that sometimes, the greatest impact is not found in answers, but in the relentless pursuit of them. The Black Dahlia case may remain unsolved, but the echoes of her life, the shadows of her final days, and the lessons of her story continue to resonate, a testament to a young woman whose name became legendary, and a reminder that some mysteries, no matter how long they remain hidden, never truly fade.